In this last lesson, I'm going to explain to you your random control render properties window here. This allows us to render single frames of animation, which would be stills, your full animation range, which would be based off your animation timeline in Maya, or a custom frame sequence. And as you can see here, I simply input these numbers. So this means that it's only going to render frame 1, frame 4, then frames 5, 20, 20 through 25, 50 through 60, and 70 through 90. It wouldn't render, frames 6 through 19, or 26 through 49, or 61 through 69. It'll just render these custom frames, and just those frames. Then you can render it whatever frame rate that you want to render at. You obviously can set your height and width ratio here. The output DSI outputs your data scene information file. The output RGB outputs your red, green, and blue channels. So if you go ahead and render, it's going to render a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. In your export configuration tab, this allows you to export your RCS, which you can then take into either Fry Render or Arion Render, and it will simply export it to the path that you set here. You can also export the RCS plus open Arion Render, plus open Fry Render, or start Fry Render, which would export the RCS and then start executing Fry Render once you hit the render button here in Maya. Your render configuration here is based off your CPU cores. So since I only have a quad core processor, I'm using all 4 cores of my processor. If you have, say, dual Xeon system, then you can render at all 8 cores. The kernel here is the type of render that you want to do. This will use the tech core, which is the hyper realistic core for realism, or you can go ahead and render with the Toon core, which works very similar to, say, the Maya Toon shader. And then if you have selected the Toon core, you also get the lighting here, which would allow for you to use your sun shading, your sun shadows. The outlier set the amount of outline here for what your object would have. The threshold, which controls the density of the outline, and the ink, which is the amount of levels that your ink would have. The higher the number, the softer it's going to be, or the darker it's going to be. You can also render, your color channel, your alpha channel, your normal channel, your matte channel, your material ID channel, or your object ID channel. You also have an option to do your Z depth channel, your mask channel, your velocity channel, or your ambient occlusion channel. Down here in your unbiased kernel, you have a bunch of different options. You can either do a full render, which is everything including the lights in your scene, the emitters layer, which is simply just what's being emitted in your scene, a direct layer, which is with the lights directly hitting in your layer, and in your indirect layer, which would be what the lights are indirectly hitting. You can also set for a maximum amount of time that you want the render to go. So say you want to render, or let the render go for 50 hours, you can go ahead and set it so once it hits 50 hours it'll not go anymore. A maximum amount of passes as well. Let's say if we wanted to do 500 passes, once it hits 500 passes, it then stops the render.